I hereby call to order the February 25th meeting of the East Penn Board of School Directors. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, first we have our Emmaus High School student government representatives, Sajan Patel and Emmeline Moyer?
Yeah.
I can't read my writing. Go ahead.
All right, so for the SGA updates, we have the Miller Keystone Blood Drive on Thursday, March 7th. This is going to be open to students and community members, so if anyone is willing to donate, you can donate blood. Snowco, the dance was rescheduled for March 9th from 7 to 10 because of the snow. And we also decided to open the gym to accommodate for the number of students that are going. Mr. Emmaus has to still be rescheduled for the third time due to the weather. So that's in the process right now. And then for sports updates, we have boys basketball. They advanced to the District 11 semifinals with the win against Pocono Mountain West on Saturday. And for swim, we have boys and girls District 11 diving was held this past weekend, and District 11 swimming will be held this Friday and Saturday at Parkland High School.
Okay, so I'm going to just touch on a couple things that our student body is doing, which is really exciting. So 2 weeks ago, 29 Emmaus High School students participated in the Pennsylvania Music Educators Association District 10 course at Exeter Township High School, and 20 of these students successfully auditioned into the Region 5 chorus. Additionally, this past weekend, 4 high school students participated in the Northeast Region Orchestra at Kutztown Area High School, and one of these students was selected for the PMEA All-State Orchestra. In addition, this past Friday, the Emmaus High School hosted their 4th annual computer science competition, in which 9 local high schools competed in. Touching on sports again, the spring sports physicals will be held on Tuesday, February 26th from 3 to 5 p.m. at the high school cafeteria. This Thursday, February 28th from 6 to 9 p.m. in the main and auxiliary gyms, the Health and Wellness Fitness Club will be hosting a dodgeball tournament. Now, next week on Friday, March 8th, Pediatric Cancer Club will be hosting their 6th annual Shave for the Brave event at the high school, and they encourage everyone to come, as it really unites us as a community through our students, faculty, and community members bravely shaving their hair to raise vital funds for cancer research. The drama department will be running their production of Les Mis from March 13th through March 17th. Tickets can be ordered online on the East Penn website. Habitat Humanity will be having their spaghetti dinner on Saturday, March 16th from 5 to 7 p.m. in the EHS cafeteria. On Saturday, March 23rd, the Mud Club will be hosting their 8th annual Empty Bowls event from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the cafeteria. And they would encourage everyone to come out and raise funds for the food program of Angel Network in the East Penn School District. And lastly, on Saturday, March 23rd as well, 33 Emmaus High School students will be competing in the Regional History Day at Muhlenberg.
Thank you. Are there any questions for our representatives? Well, thank you very much for your report. You're welcome to stay, but as always, if you need to get home to do work, you're welcome to leave also.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to request to address the board, I have one, Ms. Lynn Donches from Emmaus on videotaping and budget.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to address you. I personally wanted to say thank you for videotaping the meetings. I know I was one of many requesters, and I haven't yet come before you to say thank you. I have had the opportunity to travel the last few meetings, and I was really appreciative to be able to come back, go on the YouTube channel, and watch the meetings, even though one of them was 3 hours long. It's truly an honor, or I'm happy that they're there, and I hope that others are letting you know the same. Pertaining to the budget, As you know, it is petition signing season, and I have the privilege of helping candidates get signatures on petitions. And as I go around, the question I always get asked, and it's been by several people already, is when are the school taxes going to stop going up? So I always suggest to the people that they should come to the board and ask that question. Sadly, I know that's not going to happen. So on their behalf, I will ask you, what are you doing to stop the taxes from going up? Right now, the average median household income in East Penn is $68,272. That's a household. An average teacher's salary in East Penn is over $70,000. So just bearing that in mind, plus all of the other expenses that go on, the other taxes that are going up in the borough, and I don't know what other people's, lifestyles are like or whatever, what they're paying for, all I would ask is that, given the amount of fund balance available now, what are you doing to not raise the taxes? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Donches. Moving on to approval of minutes, may I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Next, we have some presentations. First one is on elementary card update.
Yeah, Mr. Povolitis is going to do a quick introduction, and then we have Michelle James from our CNI team joining us for the presentation.
Hi, good evening. For the past 18 months, we had a team of teachers, parents, administrators, we're all working together to create a comprehensive reporting system that communicates developing progress and performance to our partners in learning, which of course is our families and students. I just want to take a moment to thank administrators, some which are here, the teachers and parents that were involved in this committee and this hard work. So at this point, Michelle James, our STEM curriculum supervisor, is here tonight to share the work of that group with you. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to address the board regarding the elementary reporting system. I am honored to be part of this team and to lead this team, and I'd like to recognize Dr. Gutman and Mrs. Murphy. They also helped facilitate this work at the elementary level. Tonight really is a systems level overview. We're not going to get extremely technical, but I want to keep you apprised of all of the work that we've done so far with the committee and what our intentions are moving forward. And that includes a communication plan for teachers, students, and families. But before I get into the specifics of our timeline, I would like to address the fact that on our committee, we had teachers representing all grade levels, we had 2 parent representatives, and as mentioned earlier, several administrators. I was very pleased with the work that we did as a team. We collaborated, we sought to understand different viewpoints, and I believe we came up with a great plan for our students. As with any good work, we start with our why. And so when I think about the why, and when our team thought about the why, we first, of course, started with the mission and vision of East Penn School District. How do you report on the mission and vision of East Penn School District? In addition to the mission and vision, we also refer to our assessment and grading practices alignment. As you know, part of the comprehensive plan, the last comprehensive plan and the one moving forward, this has been the sole work of our instructional leadership team as well as our teachers. How do we take that work and then align it with a reporting system that will really serve all of our stakeholders? And then the final piece is parent communication. When and how do we communicate with our parents? And what do we communicate? As a committee, we came up with our report card purpose, and you'll see in bright green letters, the biggest part and the part where we really grounded all of our efforts was in making sure that we created a partnership in learning with families, students, and teachers. All decisions that we made really came back to how is this going to help our students achieve in our district. So the three main parts of our report card, we're looking to report academic progress on standards. We are reporting behaviors that promote learning, and it was really important for us to separate those two because academically, a student may be presenting in one manner while behaviorally they may be presenting in another, and we need to really look at the whole child to help them move forward and reach their goals. And finally, we want the reporting system to be a reflective piece and also inform in future learning goals for the student, future instructional moves for our teachers, and how parents can assist their students in achieving their goals. So here's a little glimpse at our schedule. For the last 18 months, we've been working on building capacity both in our committee and with our buildings. And this means talking about the various ways in which we report and how we can align what we're doing in our instructional practices in our room to the reporting piece that we give to our parents and to our students. We solidified our why. We examined several templates of report cards, both in-state and across the country. We began some design work, and we really tried to use the design thinking framework when we did this piece. And then finally, and most recently, we began working on our communication plan. How will we roll this out to everyone? So part of our plan is in this summer, we will work with our teachers and professionally develop our teachers. We will also train our teachers in the student information system, which will house the report card, so there will be some learning, there will be a learning curve there as well. In the fall, we're hoping to have a consistent Meet the Teacher Night presentation at all our buildings. We will continue to collaborate with our teachers so that we're calibrating our instructional and grading practices, and we hope to offer some parent information nights. In December, that will be our first parent-teacher conference. Currently, our parent-teacher conferences at the elementary level are in November. And then our next touch point will be in March. That will be our second parent-teacher conference. Currently, that occurs in April. So specifically, how do we communicate with parents? Because the report card reporting system is so much more than just the report card. We have ongoing reporting to our parents through electronic communication, phone calls, newsletters, Friday folders. We also use apps like Seesaw and Class Dojo. Those are just two to mention. Teachers use those, and students also use those to share some of the things they're doing in their classroom with their parents. So in addition to that, what other points during the year do we communicate with parents regarding academic progress and what's happening in our classrooms? So let's start in August. In August, we have student orientation. This is a great time for us to build that partnership that the committee stressed that we wanted to have with our parents and our teachers and our families. So that starts in August with our student orientations. In September, Meet the Teacher Night is another touch point. Again, we hope to have a consistent message, perhaps a screencast that goes out to all parents so that everyone hears the same message. In October and November is when we hope to do family information nights. If you recall, this past year, we had family information nights for Ready Math. Parents and community members were very appreciative of those nights and had a better understanding of what our mission was for Ready Math, and I believe we could sort of emulate that same process with the reporting system. In December, conferences, that will be report card number 1. And again, this is a little bit different than what we currently practice. We typically have report card number 1 in November. January, February, and March. In March will be report card number 2, and again, another time for conferences. So right here is where I'd like to address the idea that currently we function with quarterly marking periods, and the committee, including parents, has recommended that we go to trimesters, and there's several reasons for this. The first is when you think about our youngest students coming to school, it takes a while to establish those relationships. Teachers felt very much under pressure to quickly establish those relationships and begin reporting on progress, and our youngest kids need that little gift of time. So having that extension and being able to perform conferences and report card number 1 in December allows them that opportunity. It's a more balanced timeline. And then the second report card in March as opposed to April, the change there really shifts the focus to the student and what they need to do to improve or achieve their goals from March through the end of the year, whereas our current system in April, because of all the field trips, because we're heading toward the end of the year, those conferences sometimes turn into tell me about next year. So we really wanted to space it out so it was more balanced and kids and students and parents would have those equal touch points where they could reflect on how they're doing and then perhaps make goals for the future. In May, we have Open House, which is a celebration where community members, parents, all stakeholders can come to buildings and see all the fine work that students have done. And then finally, in June would be report card number 3. The other piece, oops, that was a little premature. The other piece that I wanted to mention about the trimesters is that we're really in the beginning stages, but one of the things that we're considering with trimesters is the opportunity to start to infuse other ideas like computer science into the curriculum, and having a trimester would allow us to perhaps reach that or add that into our curriculum in the future. But again, we're in the very beginning stages and we're just simply researching that. And that's it.
Any questions from the
Any
board?
questions?
Mr. Ballard?
Just a matter of information for me, what is a Friday folder?
Friday folder is a folder that goes home on Fridays with elementary students with work that they've done during the week for parents to review, and then it comes back to school on Monday. And oftentimes, it's not only just student work, it's other important information that parents need to see, and then they sign off, and it comes back. Having said that, with technology the way it is today, so much is electronic. So in place of the Friday folder, we're seeing more things like Seesaw and electronic messaging.
Okay.
Mr. Smith?
I had a couple items just real quick. You mentioned that you were looking at a couple different drafts of the report cards. When do you anticipate being able to show us what a draft would look like?
Sure. We have, like I said, we went through the design thinking phase, and we really have some great templates that we're ready to go, but what we need to do now is talk to our student information system to see how our template will fit into that information system electronically. So there may have to be some small changes that occur, and that probably will be more like June, early summer.
Okay. Also, I am really kind of thrilled to see some of the progress and the changes that we're talking about here. And I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but so correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like there's a deliberate shift away from the defined points of a year where you say to parents, here's how Johnny is doing at this moment in time, and it's becoming more of an ongoing process where you're having that communication happening in a more frequent way throughout the year. So I think that in moving to the trimester, it seems to be not necessarily freeing up time in a teacher's day, but to really refocus the importance of when they are choosing to communicate and why they are choosing to communicate to their parents of their students, and that it being that it's ongoing, it doesn't need to happen at 4 points of the year, that we can still have those same conversations over 3 points of the year. The other piece that I did have a question on, year and a half ago, we had, it was shared with us that we were looking at moving into standards-based grading. Is that, I didn't see that in this presentation, is that part of the collaborative pieces that you're talking about, working with teachers this summer, moving into that? Is that going to be reflected in a future update in some of the work that you're doing there?
Yes, those are great questions. One of the things that we really focused on was the reporting system, not just the report card, for just what you said, that it's not just memorializing 4 days in a school year. And so part of our work with teachers will be really talking about our purposes for grading and assessment and how we offer feedback and how we do that entire feedback cycle with our students and with our parents. So that's one piece. The other piece is we will be reporting on standards. Having said that, our current report card is almost a mix. There are some standards that we do report on our current report card, but it also sort of lives in the past a little bit in terms of what we used to do, and that was really because we were sort of confined by the system that we were using and how much we could actually change. And so this is a great, now that we have all received professional development in the areas of grading and assessment, this is a perfect time for us to make this move. Keeping in mind, and I can't stress this enough, that when we created this report card and the reporting system, our goal was to be able to communicate with parents and students in student and parent-friendly language so that they could understand exactly where they are and where they want to go.
Okay. This is a terrific conversation to have, and I really thank you for the time to put this together and to have these conversations outside of the classroom. It's fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Champagne?
Yes, just a couple. Thank you for pulling this together. How will they move to trimesters? I assume this is going to go from elementary, secondary, all the way up through the high school. Is that correct? Or is just...
This is just elementary.
At the elementary level, we would be in trimesters, but it would be unchanged for the middle and the high school.
Okay, because I was going to ask, the high school has half-year classes and things like that, so we're going to have a bifurcated system. Is there thoughts about moving to one uniform approach or leaving it bifurcated like it is?
That, we have not discussed that yet, but I can tell you that we don't have personnel that work in both environments so that we can independently move to trimesters at the elementary level.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Dr. Levinson?
Thank you again for this report. This question's based on something that I read in describing what this plan is about, but how does moving the trimesters, how is that going to provide space or opportunity to offer other programs?
Again, that's in the initial planning stage. It's going to give us the opportunity to perhaps put in a trimester course, much like we have at the middle level. Some of our courses run on trimesters for our students. If we want to investigate certain areas of the curriculum to have more offerings at the elementary level.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Dr. Munson?
Yeah, thank you for this. Others have said, I'm actually happy to hear that I like the idea of the family information nights. I'm glad that you found success with the math information sessions, and I hope you will offer other ones, because I do think it's a way for parents in particular to connect to the schools and connect to what their kids are doing in the classroom while learning something at the same time. I hope too that you'll consider something which seems like a minor issue, but I actually think it does speak to the value of communicating to parents and the assessment, which is, I hope you'll consider in this plan going back to actually printing report cards and sending them to parents. I'm always struck by the avalanche of paper that I receive at the beginning of every school year. I'm asked to write my name, address, and phone number as a parent 100 million times, and I get, it's ironic, but I get lots of printed material telling me how green the schools that my kids go to are. And it seems to me that report cards we're talking now 3 pieces of paper a year per student, and it, beyond just increasing access for parents, I think it also sends an important signal that this is something important, that it's at least as important as signing up for the bake sale and recycling your aluminum cans, how well your child's doing in school. I was not part of the decision to go paperless, and in most things, I'm actually pretty supportive of using the new technology, but I think that there needs to be a balance, and I hope the committee will consider that.
We actually have considered that, and I can tell you that the will of the group was to print report cards for our parents.
Very good, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for the presentation.
Again, thank you to Michelle, to Aaron, and to Tricia. And I have to say, it's been great to see the work of this committee kind of evolve over the past 18 months. And I think one of the most really enjoyable parts of the process has been the collaborative nature of everyone, and parents joining the committee and truly having a voice in helping to drive our reporting system. So thank you again.
Next on the agenda is the school calendar.
Yes, Mr. Povolitis. As we've done in the past, the goal really this evening is to provide a draft of the calendar. Doug's going to provide the board with some highlights of the calendar, and then ultimately, any feedback that you provide to us will be considered, and our goal would be then to potentially bring a final copy of the board to our next meeting for a vote. So tonight's really a presentation of a draft and then any feedback that you might have.
Okay, so thank you. As you see in your agenda, Exhibit 1 is the draft calendar. So the calendar is a long process. Administrators, leadership from the teachers union, looking into other school districts, the IU, and taking all that information together, looking at last year's calendar, and then coming up with a process that we think is best for our students. The calendar does reflect 185 school days, 191 teacher days. The first day that's proposed is August 26th. Last year is the 27th. Last day, June 10th. 3 snow days will be built in, as you see in the draft. Additional snow makeup days beyond the 3 that are built in. We would start with April 9th, and then April 9th, we would continue on with adding on to the end of the year. This is a question that oftentimes comes up, which is, why do you not pull away from more vacations? And feedback from the community in the past was that taking away vacations was a struggle for many, and attendance was an issue, and so adding on to the end of the year is what's in the draft calendar at this time. If we would use April 9th as a day, we would definitely follow the same procedure in terms of having a timeline to notify community that April 9th would then become an instructional day, if it's needed. We did look at snow days from the past. We have several years going back, but just to look at the last few, we looked at 2015-16, there was 3 snow days. 2016-17, 4 snow days. 17-18, 3 snow days. 2018-19, we have 6 so far. Hopefully that's the end. But so just kind of looking at that when making these decisions and looking at the draft calendar is important. And we can go back further if we need to. As we heard earlier from Ms. James, we are moving to trimesters at the elementary level, so marking periods and parent-teacher conferences are reflective of that change in the calendar. We did remove 2 early dismissal days from elementary conferences in comparison to last year. That's a big change. Basically, we realized we could fit them in to the 3 days, and then we could gain some instructional time back, which was important when we looked at this calendar. So we did change from, if you looked at last year's calendar, having the 4 conference days, we moved to 3, and we'll still have an evening for each of those days. So that is a big change there, and in our opinion, when we put it together, was a move in the right direction. We're able to get conferences in, which is really important to us, as you heard earlier, in response to meeting and working with our partners in learning and communicating, but at the same time, valuing the instructional time and trying to gain that back. So that balance. We have a total of 6 Act 80 days in the calendar, so these count as full instructional days for students, but the professional staff will remain in the building for professional development. And this is a huge part of learning for our teachers, which is important with so many different initiatives that we have going. Just tonight, in just one presentation, you heard about the student management system, moving to trimesters, reporting on students, and several other instructional strategies, techniques, and other initiatives that we have moving forward. Professional development is just a very important part of teacher learning and continuing to move forward to make sure we're doing what's best for our students. We did compare Act 80 days with other schools in Lehigh County just to see if we were in the ballpark, and we are. And I have some more specifics if that's needed. Early dismissal days are on the same date for elementary and secondary. That previously, they were on different days, not this current school year, but in the past, so we made sure that that was, that stayed consistent. And in the early dismissal days, students' dismissal for high school and middle school would be at 11 o'clock, and early dismissal is at 12:30 for the elementary. And they're the updates that I have.
Are there any questions from the board? Ms. Bowman?
Thank you for this and for, I'm sure, all the hard work that goes into it. One of the first things I learned as a board member was how controversial the school calendar is. So welcome to the lion's den.
Yeah, thanks.
The first question is actually just for my understanding on the Act 80 days. Are those days that there's professional development happening in the schools, or is it that there's time for teachers to go and do their own professional development? I just don't understand how they work.
Yeah, so typically that's planned professional development where the teachers are in their schools, but we plan and bring professional development to them,
okay.
And that is created in partnership with the curriculum instruction office, principals, and plans that the school has, different trainings that we need based on things that we're doing that year.
Okay, great. And then it looks like 6 of the 8 half-days then are Act 80 half-days?
Correct.
And then there's 2 extra half-days. What are those for?
So they are conference, because we have evening conferences.
Okay.
It's kind of the give back time.
Okay.
To the teachers, so it's an early dismissal for all.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Ballard?
Yeah, I have participated in some 23 discussions of the school calendar over the years, and I'm still trying to understand the rationale for not putting in an additional snow day in the calendar based on our performance over the years. If we have a minimum of 3 all the time, putting in one day that we could have for a snow day, it seems to me to be a good insurance policy, and the practice of extending the school year at the end of the year when we have the least educational effectiveness, in my opinion, for the students, seems to be counterproductive in terms of where we would schedule an extra snow day. So could you tell me the rationale for why we would not schedule an extra snow day in lieu of putting it into June when we know we're not going to be as effective?
Sure. Past community feedback was that the interrupted vacation time and planned vacation and planned time that was off in the school calendar did impact some families in a negative way, and attendance was an issue as a result. And some community members preferred it being at the end of the year, where you can plan far in advance for that.
But just clarification, there are 3 built into the school day, and
Yeah,
one more.
that's correct.
The 4th one is also in the regular calendar. It's only the 5th and 6th snow days that are at the end of the year.
That's correct, yes. So April 9th, so after 3,
So,
April 9th would be the next one.
yes, so it's only if we have more than 4 snow days that we start doing June snow days.
Then why do we say that we have scheduled 3?
3 are built into the calendar before we take the April 9th day, is my understanding.
That's correct.
But then we should be saying we have 4 scheduled snow days, including April 9th.
You could say it that way.
But April 9th is only, the other ones will have school regardless of whether we need.
If we would not have any snow days next year, right, you'd have the extra 3 days that are built in, and you'd also have school on April 9th. If you have 3 snow days, there'd be no change to the calendar at all. It'd be
And we
built in.
wouldn't be in on April 9th.
When you go into beyond 3 days, which that's why we looked back over the course of several years to see where are we falling, how many do we need to add, let's look at an average and make a decision based on that, which is what we did.
Okay, but the average we've been looking at has not been what we expect climatologically to be the case for the future. So the past is not necessarily a reflection of the future, and I'm just trying to understand why we would make the decision to put extra days in June as opposed to extra days somewhere else in the calendar. And the only thing you've basically said is we've had some feedback. And do we have any statistics on how many parents or any number of things? Have we taken any recent surveys to determine what the current opinion of the school population of parents is in regard to whether they would rather go longer in June or take away one of the vacation days that might be scheduled as a possible vacation day and could be used as a snow day by some decision point in the year to use that, and so have it a variable vacation day rather than a variable snow day.
Sure.
You understand what I'm saying?
I do, I understand, yes, thank you.
In response to that, with Mr. Povolitis being fairly new to the district, no, we've not done any formal survey to the community. The one piece that I want to add, just with regard to this ongoing discussion about identifying snow makeup days, as we refer to them within the calendar, you might recall several years ago in East Penn, the Friday of President's Weekend, which is in 2020 would be Friday, February 14th. That had traditionally, prior to this year, been a day in East Penn that was a non-instructional day and was also identified as a snow makeup day. And I believe it was a great discussion that we had at the board in terms of, like, every year we were using that as a snow makeup day. So we just, in essence, made it an instructional day, again, with the attempt to try to recoup as much instructional time during the school year and actually schedule it as instructional time. So that's one example. But I guess, to your point, Mr. Ballard, the other times that we would then have to look at would be really that spring break time. And while there's no formal survey that we've done of the community, so when I refer to spring break, I'm talking about in 2020, it would be the 9th, the 10th, and the 13th, in which school is currently closed. That is feedback that we did hear from community members, typically right around the time when the calendar is presented, and that feedback was received via phone call and/or email and/or social media. And I can say that because I was traditionally the administrator who facilitated the calendar discussion. And we also received feedback as well from our teaching staff in terms of, could we look at least preserving one identified calendar or one identified holiday break and keep it as a holiday break and not use that as makeup time.
Dr. Levinson?
So I noted on the calendar, the proposed calendar for next year, that graduation is now on the Sunday following the nominal last day of school.
Exactly, yes.
Do you see any advantage to maybe carrying that forward in every year? Because I know the last couple of years, or last few years, has been pretty tough trying to keep graduation within the nominal last, or it was before the nominal last day here, and when you tack on days, then you have to worry about how to schedule seniors for finals and instructional time and whatnot.
Yes, I do see that because of the fact that what you just explained, yes. So we did move that intentionally because of the fact that with the snow days and the makeup time, you end up having a very different schedule for seniors.
Right, but I'm just wondering whether there'll be, if that's something that can be done every year, or are there other considerations?
We can
in June, I don't know.
We can look into doing that moving forward, yes.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Champagne?
Yeah, going back to the makeup days and the snow days, I mean, just to make sure I understand that the way it says, beyond the 3 days, the first day that would be made up would be April 8th, is that correct? So there's 3 days prior to April 8th?
Yes, so what would happen is April 8th, right, currently the way it sits, April 8th is that early dismissal day, which is the give back day for conferences, and the 9th is a full instructional day. It would just slide to the 9th.
Okay, so we have 3 days prior to April 8th. If we have to go an extra day, we get the 8th first, and then we slide to the 9th.
Should we have used more than 3 snow days?
Yeah, that's...
By April 8th, April 8th will become an instructional day.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then why are we dismissing early on the 9th? Explain that to me again.
That is that extra day that we talked about because evening conferences, the teachers stay late for evening conferences one time, so that would be a give back day where they would be dismissed early as well.
Basically shifting that from the 8th to the 9th.
Yeah, I understand that. I guess what I'm hearing a lot, at least from my daughters who are both in AP classes, with the amount of time that we've been out this year, not, the flood was an unfortunate incident, but just the amount of time for snow days that we've been out, there's a lot of agitation among the kids that are taking those classes because there simply hasn't been enough instructional time. So I guess I'm of the opinion we should try to move more instructional time back into the calendar versus at the end of the calendar. I know parents don't like to give up their breaks. I know they like to travel,
right.
But I'm just hearing from a number of students that the instructional time is being very compressed. They're getting, hit double, triple time, partly because of the school being out for a week in November, but also the number of days that they've been out. So I would love to see some consideration, again, going back to, can we put more instructional time in before we start tacking on at the back end?
And for historical purposes, I mean, this is the second year we've had 3 days built in rather than 2.
Right, I understand.
So we have been moving in that direction.
And I know that we added that extra day by taking it away from the President's Day weekend, but as this year has pointed out, it still hasn't been sufficient with the amount of work that's being expected.
And at the elementary level, we did gain 2 more days that are full days instead of early dismissal days because we cut down conference time. So we did gain 2 days at the elementary, 2 full days versus early dismissal days. So that was a win as far as instructional minutes compared to last year. Not a lot, but it's still.
I think that's wonderful. I guess, can we get a similar win at the high school level?
I hear you.
Mr. Smith?
All right, thank you for sharing this with us. I have a few questions that are going to be hopefully not too challenging. I completely understand the Rubik's Cube nature of developing a calendar, and that you change one thing and you end up having 5 other problems that you now have to fix on your hands. So I have a couple of questions, and I'm going to kind of lead into my broader line of thinking here. Do you know when we have these 14 early dismissal days, do the local private and parochial schools whose students we transport on our buses, do they follow the same schedules, or do they run a full day schedule? And are we then paying for an extra bus route to bring those kids home?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I can speak to that. There are some days where the private schools will still have session regardless of what the reason is, and we would still transport that.
Right.
I can't speak to exactly the days that are in here. I don't know that.
Okay.
We'd have to look.
So the reason why I ask is because while I appreciate giving 2 days back to the elementary level, we've heard earlier, I would also like to see a win at the high school level as well. And when we have all these elementary, or really everybody has an early dismissal, we could be saving a little bit by having more full days of instruction from the transportation aspect in that regard. So when you go into the conference days, when you cut out the two of those conference days, how does that, is there still one evening of conferences?
Correct.
There's still the one evening of conferences?
One evening in the fall, one in the spring, yes.
Okay. How does cutting 2 days out impact the amount of time parents get to sit down with their kids' teacher? Is it still the same block of time, or are we cutting that out as well? Because the math doesn't make sense. It could take out 2 days of what was once 5.
So we were able to, it's the same time, it's just there was gaps. So the only downfall is the teacher might have every single session back-to-back scheduled pretty tight instead of having openings here and there. So is there maybe a flexibility issue where a parent may need this, or a teacher would want, it's going to be tighter, but we can make it work where it doesn't impact parents and teachers negatively unless there's a scheduling conflict.
Okay.
But it was that balance between instructional time, and it does still fit.
I can also share to perhaps further answer your question. Several years ago, there were, within the calendar, on elementary early dismissal days, on some days, elementary students were dismissed at like 12:30. On other early dismissal days, elementary students were dismissed at 1 o'clock. And part of that was also based on half-day kindergarten so that we could run a modified kindergarten schedule. In going to full-day kindergarten, within the calendar, elementary early dismissal is now consistent at 12:30. So what that also allowed us to do then during parent-teacher conference week is we actually picked up at least a parent-teacher conference block, which meet on every single day. And so there was some additional time, a small amount of time, but again, it's like 3 or 4 families more that we could see, that we recoup the time there as well.
Okay. And sorry to keep harping on the conference blocks, plural, but I think there's a lot of time there that we could be making up. I think we've saved 2 days, that's great. I think there's more time that we could be making up. And this may be a contractual issue, but is there any way that we could maybe turn some of those half-days into, and combine them so that we can have more evening hours for parents who have busy working schedules to be able to come in, and then replace that time, give that time back to the teachers to take off and swap out, and what would be we could maybe, I don't know, use that as a particular snow day, makeup day or something like that, but build that so that we can maybe have one of those off days earlier in the calendar. I think there's a lot that we could do here to, I don't know, free some of that time up. And what really makes me, what's really driving a lot of this thought process of mine is, I look at the month of December, and that really jumps out at me. That the month of December is a huge challenge for me when I'm looking at potentially approving this, and voting for approval coming up at the next board meeting. In the month of December, we have our conferences, which take up, in that first week of December, we have 1 full day of instruction. And then we've got 2.5 total days of instruction, but really those 3 half days, your building schedules are all thrown out of whack. That second week, is a full week,
There's more half days.
but we've got Keystones in there. And then that third week is a full week, but for all intents and purposes, the 20th is going to be a wash. So if you're looking at a full month of what should be good, solid instruction, we're now reduced to 10 full days, really more likely 9 full days, after coming off of the Thanksgiving break, going into the winter break, with Keystones right in there. That, to me, screams like a huge, it seems to me not to be as efficient as it possibly could be. So that month right there, you know, if we can't work out anything with the early dismissal, the 14 early dismissal days that we have, if we could put the conferences back into November and kind of get some of that back, that instruction back in December, it would be fantastic. I know it doesn't really sync up with our earlier conversation or presentation that we heard tonight, but I like to think that with our focus on ongoing communication with families and students, you can have an ongoing conversation in conference nights in November to talk about how a student's progressing, and then, you know, you wouldn't have the report card in front of them at that point in time, obviously, but you could still have a good, meaningful conversation without having that one document in front of the people who are having the conversation. So that's just my thoughts. I really think that, you know, two things: 14 early dismissal days is a lot, and December is an even bigger challenge for me, the month of December.
And I appreciate that, thank you. They're great questions, and I can tell you we had many conversations and discussions about how it would look. When I look at November in front of me, I have November's calendar from this current year, and November did not look very good. Now it's shifted to December because of everything we just talked about with trimester moves. So November was not very good when you looked at it for this particular year. And so now it shifted itself to December. Ultimately, it falls somewhere, but I hear what you're saying. We can continue to look at that. We did move the conferences just so that we would have the reporting, and the report card would be that conversation piece that you could start with, kind of, since the family's already received that information. But I hear what you're saying, that ongoing communication, it's something we can look at. But you either shift it to November or December. With Thanksgiving and with the conferences last year in November and the early dismissal days, there was minimal instructional days in November. So it's one of those things, trying to balance everything.
Yeah, like I said, it's one giant
I would say
Rubik's cube.
also, we just had a presentation, an 18-month study on this, and if their recommendation is to have the conferences in December, I would put a lot of weight in that rather than trying to override that in a week of looking at the schedule or 4 days looking at the schedule. I mean, hearing the presentation, I got the impression there was a lot of time put into it and thought put into why things were moved and the reasoning behind it. And I think we shouldn't just ignore that because December looks bad now. I mean, you have to do it at some point, and I'm a little concerned if we're just looking at December and then what happens November if we move it. And we've had a recommendation to move it to December, and I think we should understand the reasons before we just push back on it.
Right, and I'm not suggesting we ignore it. I'm just saying that's something that jumped out to me, and I certainly value the conversations that took place over the last 18 months. It's just, this was one thing that jumped out at me a little bit. I did have one other quick question. You said you had the numbers handy if anybody needed them. Can you give us a ballpark of how many early dismissal days other districts had in the area, if you had that number handy? I was just curious.
Yes. Okay, so Parkland Rockland has 4 early dismissal days for professional development and 5 for conferences. Northwestern Lehigh has 4 early dismissal days for professional development, 3 for conferences. Salisbury has 9 early dismissal days for professional development in addition to conferences.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Munson?
I thank you, like everyone else, for all the hard work that goes into this. When Ms. Campbell was in charge of this, I know that we had many detailed conversations with her. And I just sort of wanted to heap on the concern of my other colleagues on the board, that we try to think creatively and in innovative ways to try to bring more instructional time back into the part of the school year when it makes the most difference, particularly for those students who are on schedules that are outside our control, like AP exams and so forth. So I just have some specific suggestions. I'm sympathetic to the point that was made earlier about President's Day. I did notice that there are schools in our area that do use the 17th of February, President's Day, as a snow makeup day, so it's a scheduled holiday. And I wonder if it's worth considering doing that as well for our district. And then I also would suggest that while we're looking at possible instructional days, that is student-present instructional days as possible makeup days, that we also choose one or more of the professional development days to work in the same way. When I look at the calendar, the one that sticks out to me is March 13th, which is currently a professional development day. We could consider making that a possible snow makeup day and moving that professional development day to June. Then sort of listening to some of the things others on the board said, Mr. Champagne had asked some questions about the give back half days to account for conferences. That's another thing that it seems like if we're trying to balance hours, we might give those back at other times of the year in the way Mr. Ballard put it, at those times where perhaps they're less impactful on the students and what's going on in the classroom. So maybe some of those give back days could be in June. And then the last thing, and I'm going to say this it's a sort of mean-spirited way of opening a new kettle of fish, which is not really about this, but I share Mr. Smith's point about December. One, I think, very practical way that we could at least minimize that the problems with a full December is if we start moving as a district to de-emphasizing the Keystone exams, so those do not loom as large in our classrooms before and during the exams themselves. And while that doesn't change the schedule, it actually puts the education of our students more squarely back where I think many of us would like to see it. So those are just some of my suggestions. As Dr. Bacher put it, we've only had this for 4 days. I know I don't want to disrespect the fact that you've had it much longer and have spent much more time, but like others on the board, I receive a fair bit of, I guess feedback would be a charitable way to put things this, and I hear lots about missed school time during the year, and I also hear quite a bit, frankly, about the inability to schedule vacations in the summer, given the way we handle our snow days. We only have an 8-week summer vacation here in East Penn, and if we have a full week of that as possible snow makeup days, I mean, I'm not good enough at math to do this without taking my shoes off, but that's 12-13% of the entire summer vacation is mortgaged right now against snow days. So I think that should be taken into consideration as well.
Thank you.
Ms. Bowman?
I just wanted to echo some of the other comments that board members have made, particularly about the half-days, which from a parenting perspective are quite chaotic. And I think also from an educational perspective, I can't tell you how many times I asked my son what was happening on a half day, and he said, we do nothing, we watch movies, we whatever, and I'm not definitely saying that that's exactly what's happening in school, but they are more difficult instructionally, and if we can minimize those in any way, I think it definitely helps education. I like Dr. Munson's idea about putting some of these at the end of the school year, because it's, I would imagine, less disruptive on the grown-ups to have professional development at the end of the year than it is on students who have kind of checked out by then and are just not paying attention. I did have a question. I just cannot remember what it is in October that we have the 3 days off for.
So they are professional development days for staff. We find it very valuable at the beginning of the year as things are just rolling out to do professional development at that time.
Yeah.
And they're kind of in the moment, living with whether it's new resources, new strategies, and things that, that we're doing. The timeliness is just critical for professional development.
Okay, great,
Then
thanks.
the 9th is Yom Kippur.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I could figure out all the other ones, and that one I just couldn't figure out. But the general, I guess the main point is, I think if we can move to the end of the year, some of the professional development, if that's possible, and I don't know if it is, with our number one goal of increasing instruction during the school year and building in more instructional time, I think, I can't speak for all parents, but I think what parents want is consistency. It's not so much that they want a spring break or they want a holiday here and there. They just want to know when the days off are and when the days the kids are in school so that they can make plans. So as long as the calendar is straightforward, I think it'll, generally speaking, work for parents.
Mr. Flanders?
Yeah. In the line of trying to move things a little earlier in the calendar and also picking on December, because that seems to be a theme. And I may be stepping in it when I say this, but the Monday after Thanksgiving, most businesses are back in session.
Yep.
I realize it's tradition and there may be some flexibility in travel there, but I'd appreciate a look at that day as something that we could change to an instructional day. May have been suggested before.
That's the start of hunting season, generally.
I do know that. But also in line with the, I see that the State Game Commission is maybe trying to move that to an earlier day. So that may be not the start of hunting season come 2019 or 2020. And also, I know this is not for next year, but maybe in a longer term, looking at moving the end of the second marking period into December so that students in the high school especially don't have to leave for their Christmas break, winter break, come back in January, remember everything they had, and then have a couple weeks to study for those midterms or final exams, depending on the classes they take. If those were able to be moved to December, not only do you get that extra instructional time up front when the weather is more likely to be good and we don't have to worry about it, but you also have a continuity there that people don't have to worry about remembering all this stuff over that break period and then come back and try to take.
Thank you.
I have one comment. I just looked at the calendar, and I'm kind of new to the board, but I just wondered, could we front load some of the professional development?
Correct.
Would that be a better possibility?
I would do it in August.
They are, we have some.
Front load them in August.
Yeah, so we do have several professional development days.
So we can eliminate the half days
in August.
during the school year. Eliminate some of those during the school year by front loading more.
And do more in August.
In August.
Okay.
That would benefit, I think, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other comments? I would like to echo, I do agree that having days earlier in the schedule is preferable to adding them on at the end of June. I do want to caution against moving a lot of professional development to June. That also involves improving the education of our kids, and so I find training is much more beneficial when you can use it right after you get trained. And I would be a little concerned that professional development in June and then being off for 2 or 3 months would not have as much value as it would during the school year. So I would just caution that that's potentially a drawback of that approach. Are there any other comments or questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
And the last presentation is budget update.
These are to be passed around as well, if anybody wants to see. Just some resources if people want. Yeah, I think just maybe. Okay. An update on continuing, I should say, our budget conversations in terms of the priorities that we have in our budget for 2019-20. Again, the format will be very similar to our other presentations, our other budget presentations that we've had so far. The one piece that I want to bring your attention to right at the beginning of the presentation, again, tonight we're going to be focusing on Phase 3 of our technology plan. You'll see that cost is revised slightly this evening now that we've had a bit more time to look more closely at Phase 3 of our technology plan. That amount originally, when Mr. Saul and I originally shared our plan with the board back in December, was $840,000. So you could see that projection, that cost projection is down slightly. In addition to the technology plan, we're going to talk about the technology integration specialist as well as the balanced literacy resources. And the balanced literacy resources, you'll see that cost again now that we've had a chance to more fully investigate the resources. That amount has increased slightly. Originally, we had projected resources at $150,000. So we have a slight decrease in the technology plan, slight increase in balanced literacy resources, which resulted in a slightly lower total for our district priorities, which you see there of $1,660,000. Just for a frame of reference for the board, that amount originally back in December was $1,720,000. You'll see as well, again, the focus for this evening, as well as where we go from here. Mr. Saul, Mr. Anushko, and I will be back in March to talk about facilities, as well as Mr. Saul will go into some of the long range and capital plan. So we're going to start off first with the technology plan. And I'll give you a brief synopsis of our previous 2 phases of implementation of technology. In particular, remember that we have in grades kindergarten, 1st and 2nd, we have shared use of devices. And what that means is that we have iPads in a ratio of 2 students to every 1 device. That equates to approximately 14 devices that we have in our primary classrooms in a shared use environment. And that really is based on the fact that in many of our elementary classes, when our students are using their devices, they're either doing it in small groups and or station type of work. We also have in grades 3 and 4, every student at the elementary level in 3rd and 4th grade currently has an iPad that has been issued to the individual student. And we're also at the point, with regard to, by now, having implemented 2 of our 3 phases of our technology plan, that all of our students in 6th grade, 7th grade, 9th grade, and 10th grade have been issued a Chromebook that is theirs. And as you know, at the secondary level, our students are also allowed to take those devices home. So where we are for phase 3 of our technology plan, which is planned for 2019-2020, is that we would lease iPads for our upcoming 3rd grade class because again, the intention is that the device follows the child. So previous third and fourth graders who have a device, that device follows them to the next grade level. So we would then issue iPads for our upcoming third graders next year, and we would then, in order to complete our technology plan, issue devices, particularly Chromebooks, for students in grades 6, 9, and 12. And again, the grade levels are simply because all previous purchases stay with the students and follow that class as they graduate up. And so 6, 9, and 12 would complete our technology plan. So when we look at costs, specifically for 1920 for Phase 3, the first year of a 4-year lease of iPads is approximately $50,000. You might notice that cost is slightly lower than our iPad leases in previous years, and that's pretty simply because of the fact that we have a smaller group class for which we're purchasing iPads. So this particular lease cycle that we're proposing for the upcoming year really just has fewer devices as part of that lease. We also have learned from past experiences that we really need to try to include all potential costs that we can think of. And in particular, we know that we have charging and storage solutions for which we need to account financially, and that's approximately $7,000. And that's really because at the elementary level, our students do not take their devices home, and so they need a place that they can store them so that they can be charged and ready to use for the next day. In grades 6, 9, and 12, the approximate cost for the Chromebooks, purchasing same devices that our students currently have, is $623,000, again, for those 3 grade levels. That takes us, well, before we get to the total, I want to also mention that for the 2019-2020 school year, we did include approximately a 10% contingency, and we took that as 10% of what is our approximate total cost, and we really included that so that we could be mindful of any unexpected changes or spikes that could happen in enrollment in those particular grade levels, as well as remember that we recently went out to the vendors and received price quotes for devices. And so we're just trying to be very mindful of the fact that certainly when we're ready to purchase those devices in July, there is a possibility that that price could change. Not something we expect that would happen drastically, but that really is, those are just some of the reasons for including a bit of a contingency there, which takes us to the total for our technology plan for Phase 3 of $750,000. Again, slightly less than what we had originally planned. An ongoing conversation that we've had at the board level is the recognition that we all have that there are the one-time costs associated with purchasing and or leasing technology for a particular school year, and then there are ongoing costs that we know we will need to invest to continue to support technology in East Penn. In particular, this slide provides the board with a very high-level update of the ongoing costs, particularly as we look at 2020-21, and we can project similar costs beyond that, and I believe Mr. Saul has actually provided the board with some of those longer-range costs as part of our long-range financial plan. But you'll see there the iPad lease, which includes devices that we've been leasing, that lease started in 2017-18. We then added another iPad lease in 2018-19, fewer devices, hence less money. The iPad lease that we're then proposing for next year of 2019-20, as well as recognizing that we will need to continue to refresh Chromebooks. And the plan as of right now is that students would keep their Chromebook throughout middle school for the 3 years of their middle school career, and then we would purchase new devices for an upcoming 6th grade class, and then students would keep their devices for their high school career. And then at the end of a 4-year cycle, we would purchase new devices for an incoming freshman class. So those are, this is really a recognition that we have ongoing costs associated with sustaining a technology plan of approximately $740,000 annually. Any questions about, and again, I think it's helpful if we follow a similar format in terms of sort of breaking things up with regard to questions and/or comments that the board might have, particularly about phase 3 of the technology plan and looking at some of those device costs.
Dr. Munson?
Yeah, just a question with the ongoing costs. I mean, these ongoing costs that are listed are all about individual units that are in the hands of students. But what about the larger infrastructure and the need to replace switches and routers and things like that? I don't know how many of those are that we lose every year, but is it significant enough that we should be looking at those costs on a slide like this as well?
Mr. Saul, do you mind if I put you on the spot for a minute? Because we've actually had this conversation in terms of thinking about our some of our capital projects as well as long-range plan.
Yeah, we've talked about that. As you may recall, we completely overhauled the infrastructure last year, so we're certainly in a place where I would hope we're fine for a few years. While we've talked about that, we haven't baked it into our financial plan at this point. So I think probably we need to revisit that. It's just a matter of figuring out the life cycle of the infrastructure and then deciding how to set that aside and whether or not it's appropriate to put that into capital reserve. You know, you have to look at the laws. Capital reserve is legislated what you can use those monies for. And if you can't put it in a capital reserve, it becomes a little bit challenging in terms of the accounting, how you do that, but certainly we could figure that out. So I guess the short answer was, we've talked about it, we haven't done it.
And I think as well, part of our discussion, and certainly discussions that will then have more at the board level, was also looking at things such as debt service in the district, and are there points at which our debt service reduces, and potentially then seeing those as opportunities where we might make some ongoing investments in our infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my question was less about investment. I mean, you know, I don't think of these Chromebooks as investment, right? I mean, they're consumable goods over 3 years or 4 years in the case of high school students. And do we think about the backbone for our IT in the same way, or do we think of that in the same way as building walls in the school? And, you know, I
think they're talking about it in terms of capital investment.
Yeah.
Right.
I think for me, having recently gone through the total infrastructure overhaul process fairly recently, I think the lesson there is that you cannot ignore it and look at it as a one-time consumable and not to plan for the fact that it is something that's going to need to be addressed again, unfortunately, probably in the not-so-distant future.
I mean, I guess I would prefer to know those up front and to build them into the budget. I mean, you know, it would be better to replace 3 switches a year than to come back in 5 years and have to do 40 switches. But maybe that's not how they fail. I don't know enough about it. The other question I guess I had is, we're 2/3 of the way in, we're two or three phases into doing this, so there's thousands of Chromebooks and iPads in the district now. You had mentioned on the previous slide, you know, there's at least one thing you learned that we need that you didn't necessarily anticipate, which is iPad storage charging solutions. Are there other surprises that we might expect to see in the near term as needs to maintain a one-to-one program? And, you know, I asked that being mindful that I was in another Pennsylvania school recently, and they had like these kind of lockers in the hallways where you could charge your Chromebook. And it seemed sort of neat. Maybe it's a solution in search of a problem, but are there other issues with now having these Chromebooks and iPads being more ubiquitous that are going to require other investments or costs?
Great question. My initial thought is that certainly our administration has a plan to come back to the board and talk more about our one-to-one and what we've seen as successes and lessons that we've learned. And so I see some of your question, Dr. Munson, potentially being addressed there, which is, again, more of a longer-term maybe answer to that. But we have had, our building leadership team, our district leadership team have had ongoing conversations in terms of really trying to anticipate all of the be different topics that might come up with regard to every student having a device. For example, will kids take their device to lunch? What are they going to do when they go to gym? Can we make sure that kids go to their locker before they go to gym so they don't have their devices? Let's carefully monitor break fix that's happening in each building so that we can see if there are any trends. Are things happening in one place more than another? And we've certainly been having those conversations and been responsive to those questions. To answer your question in terms of have there been other things that have come up or sort of like big picture takeaways for us, I think feedback that I continue to hear from building principals as well as teachers is just the importance of ongoing professional development first and foremost for your teachers in terms of how that technology is being used. That's maybe an answer very different from where you were going in some of the logistical things. But I really feel as if for the most part, many of the logistical hurdles, if they haven't been anticipated, we've been able to certainly overcome them in a short amount of time.
Thank you.
Mr. Champagne?
Yeah, along the same line, I mean, this talks about hardware. I mean, I guess one of the questions I have is, how often are we updating software and other, infrastructure that supports this system? And are those costs captured somewhere other than in this kind of technology assessment? Because, I mean, the hardware obviously, loses its value as time goes on, but software also loses its capability, and that's always evolving. So are we planning, or are we keeping kind of a track of how we need to update the software side of this technology?
I was going to say, if I may jump in, I can't speak in terms of the planning, but I can speak in terms of the budgeting. So software is budgeted in the operational budget, so in the technology department budget, if you will.
Okay.
And that's where that's carried, which is separate from the technology plan, which is the devices that are issued to students.
Okay, so we're accounting for the needs of updating software somewhere. That's why I just wanted to make sure.
Right, in like the departmental budget rather than the technology plan.
Okay.
Correct.
And then going to the point of, not having sorted out the life cycle of let's say the backbone, I would hope that when you do your long-range plan, you at least put some line item in there that addresses that. You may not know the exact amount, but we're thinking about it, because I would hate to see our long-range plan be absent that kind of infrastructure need. And, if we're accruing for it over a 5-year or a 10-year or whatever period, we've at least got some recognition that we're going to have to figure out where that money's coming from.
Take the depreciation
However you
requirement
want
and
to do
use that as a
depreciation,
baseline.
Yeah, that's another way to do it. Yep.
Mr. Ballard?
Yeah, in your ongoing costs, you have the hardware leasing costs and so forth, but where is the broke-fix component that also accompanies this?
That's actually part of our technology budget as well. Separate from, again, the cost that we presented to the board really for this evening is specifically looking at that Phase 3 hardware devices. The break fix is part of the technology budget.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Levinson?
This question, I'm just thinking out loud. Is there going to be any recaptured value in the decommissioned Chromebooks? I know they're going to be 4 years old at that point, but could they have some value where the district could recoup costs for the 1,000 books or whatever that's going offline?
Great question. Something as well that Mr. Moan has had some preliminary conversations in terms of there are vendors that actually buy back devices. I think it was perhaps even the board early on in this process may have had conversations about taking a look at those devices and making them available potentially to families who do not have a device at home. So, I appreciate the question and know that it is something that certainly we are investigating as we near, in a very short period of time. It's hard to believe that some of those devices will be nearing the end of their life cycle here in East Penn.
Mr. Byrd?
Yes, I know you're going into the last phase of phase 3 of the project. Do we have any metrics to measure how the impact has impacted our students and the results at this point? Or are we still looking at that?
You might recall, we recently administered a survey, Bright Bites survey, which really measures various aspects of technology in terms of classroom and how it's being used, access, and certainly that is information that we can provide to the board in terms of, we're looking at that as our baseline data, because clearly we're at the point of we're 2/3 of the way, and so we have some inequity in terms of students having access to those devices and some not. So those would certainly be some metrics. I think other really valuable information is feedback from teachers, parents, and students in terms of how technology has changed the way in which teachers teach and the types of learning activities and tasks in which kids are engaged. I see that being some of the more qualitative information that certainly I think we can bring to the board and share some of those experiences with you.
Thank you.
Mr. Champagne?
Just a follow-up on how we, the end of life kind of thoughts here. I know at LCTI, for example, if they make that equipment that they've used available to the other districts, and, they do it in an auction, some format, or just make it available if districts have a need for it. And I know, the citizens of East Penn are paying for this, the taxpayers are paying for this equipment, and I think, giving the opportunity, to see it recirculated within the district is probably the top priority. But as we look at the end of life, we might think about some of the other districts in our county who are either looking to implement technology or need additional technology is a way to kind of improve the relationship with those districts, to give those students a chance, is what we're giving our students. So as we think about this, I would hope you would look into whether that is something we might see. I don't know how Allen or Deer Off or some of the other districts are handling technology, but, thinking about it in those contexts too, I think would be very helpful.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Thank you.
Okay.
I guess moving on.
Moving on. You heard me make the comment just before about the importance of really any work that I believe we do in the district is about the professional development and the coaching and support that we offer teachers, as well as students in terms of embracing and implementing those changes. And so moving on to the instructional technology specialist, these are, we currently, and I'll get into the our breakdown by building, but currently district-wide, we have 2 instructional technology specialists. You might recall last year, the board approved an additional technology specialist. So 2 years ago, we had 1 individual. We now have 2 and are very fortunate for that addition. So in this particular budget, we are requesting another instructional technology specialist. And to give you a sense of those 2 individuals, those roles in the districts and their responsibilities, they really work very closely and we refer to them as coaches in terms of supporting teachers and leaders in planning and implementation of instruction so that technology is integrated in meaningful ways. And that coaching really it takes on a variety of forms. It could certainly be supporting teachers in the planning of technology. It could be modeling a lesson in a classroom. It could be co-teaching. It could be observing the teacher as a coach and then providing reflective feedback, not evaluative at all, but really just feedback in terms of what strategies were effective in terms of meeting student needs. So that's the coaching piece. And then certainly our technology specialists are continually investigating tools that, new strategies that would be useful to our teachers in terms of that tech integration piece. They are pivotal in terms of developing and leading professional development for teachers, whether that's by building, by grade level, by departments at the secondary level, or by the entire district. They certainly
certainly are critical in the PD piece for us. You heard me say before, they also help to support building leaders. We rely very heavily on our building leaders to be instructional leaders and models, and certainly our coaches help to support our leaders in that role as well. Our technology specialists also work very closely with our district level departments, specifically our special education and our CNI team. And then ultimately, our tech integration specialists, we really like to think of them as liaisons in terms of connecting the Office of Technology with all of the things instructionally, as well as some of the things logistically that are happening with regard to technology out in our buildings. So when we think of those two individuals and the myriad of roles that I've just described that they have, this really just gives the board a simple breakdown of the total number of professional staff that we have by building. It's about 550 teachers that we have. And again, while our instructional technology specialists, while their primary responsibility, as you just heard me say, is to support and coach teachers, there are also hundreds of support staff that we have in our building who are also in many ways helping students to use technology. So our instructional technology specialists are certainly working with those individuals as well. Their primary focus would be our teaching staff, but they're reaching well beyond 550 individuals. So when we think about these particular statistics, you might be thinking, well, how do two people service all of those individuals? And so our CNI team has done a remarkable job working closely with our two instructional technology specialists and really talking about how two individuals can best serve the needs of 10 different buildings, about 550 teachers. And some ways in which they've done that is we've taken our elementary buildings, and one of our instructional technology specialists supports 4 elementary buildings, and the other supports 3 elementary buildings. And then what our 2 specialists have done is one of them supports the secondary humanities department, and the other supports the STEM humanities department. And to remind the board, we've also really aligned our curriculum and instruction supervisors along that same framework of a humanities and a STEM. So what we've really tried to do is gradually begin to build a model in which we can sustain and have teams of people who can coach and work with teachers. So what I mean by that, if Mrs. Murphy, as our ELA, our humanities supervisor, she can then work closely with one of the particular instructional technology specialists and know when to collaborate with that individual with regard to curriculum development, implementation, perhaps which particular grade levels might need her support in certain areas. So that's just to give the board a really simple example of how we've begun to build a model so that we can use these individuals in the most, I'm going to say, first effective way to really get them in classroom supporting teachers, and an efficient way as well. I've also shared with the board some of the ways in which our instructional technology specialists, like through simple things like ongoing communication through newsletters with teachers that are available online so that they can continue to share resources with people in a very efficient manner. Our instructional technology specialists regularly attend department meetings, they regularly attend faculty meetings, they regularly attend those professional development opportunities, and are often facilitating those professional development opportunities that we offer on our Act 80 days. And then they're also a critical part of our district leadership team and our own professional learning, because we know that it's important for us as district and building leaders to be modeling the changes in terms of technology implementation that we hope to see in classrooms. So the impact of hiring that additional instructional technology specialist would really be to increase the capacity to do all of those responsibilities that we talked about initially: coaching, modeling, co-teaching, facilitating professional learning, and continuing to support teachers, departments, and leaders. And you see there the recurring cost, which is really the approximate salary and benefits of a teacher. So this individual is considered part of our teaching staff. Questions about the instructional technology specialist?
Ms. Bowman?
I think a clarification. So currently we have 2 and the proposal is to go to 3?
Yes.
Okay. And then, is there any benefit to doing some of this? It just seems our district is so big and 2 or 3, even adding 3 doesn't cover the whole district. And I was just curious if there's a benefit to somehow creating I don't know if specialist is the right word, so please forgive my vocabulary, but some sort of capacity through professional development, for example, having librarians or some other notable teacher that would make sense, specially trained to help others in that same building.
Yeah, such a great question. And I love the fact that you identified our librarians, and that is a department, actually, our librarians, that our instructional technology specialists have been working very closely with in terms of really looking at how their role has shifted from perhaps traditional librarians in which you come, you pick out books, and you leave with your resource. And really now our librarians are much more media specialists. And certainly we look to them to be teacher leaders in terms of how technology can enhance the instructional process. The other piece that I will mention is we've tried very hard to build our teacher leadership capacity with regard to modeling and coaching with regard to in terms of technology integration. And throughout the district, we have a large team we've identified them as our technology innovators. And so these are, again, teacher leaders who we've offered some very specific and targeted professional development to them. Our instructional technology specialists coach them specifically, and then we rely on that larger group to help us facilitate some of the professional development that might be happening on district days. Because even with, when you have about 550 teachers together for professional development broken up into multiple sessions, clearly 2 people can't do all that. So I appreciate you bringing that up, and is certainly something that we continue to look at as well, because you're right, 3 will certainly, we were so fortunate to have 2, and we can see the impact of their work in terms of being able to support more teachers in terms of technology integration. And we see great advantage to having 3, but we recognize there is still a need.
Okay. And just, can I have one more follow-up question?
You still have the floor.
Could you explain what's not happening currently with 2 that 3 would address?
I think part of it is really just the sheer number of teachers who will be able to be impacted by the change. I think it will allow us greater opportunity as well for right now, the coaching session. So for example, if you're a teacher and you're planning a lesson in social studies and I'm the instructional technology specialist, I will have limited amount of time that I can spend with you. So we might be able to plan, you might be able to implement, I might be able to give you feedback, and then I have maybe 5 other teachers who are waiting sort of in the wings for me to give that, to help them, to support them in that same way. So I think what it would allow us to do is to continue that relationship and really deepen and make those conversations that we're having about technology integration even more rich, so that that coaching can happen in an ongoing way, not just a quick incident that happens here, and then I have other teachers that are waiting for me.
Thank you.
Dr. Levinson?
Yes, what's the current teacher and staff participation rate with what the IT specialist can offer? Are all teachers looking to use their services, or are some being kind of reserved at this point, or?
Yeah, that's always an interesting question, and actually a conversation that I know our CNI team, I look to them because I know that's a conversation they continue to have with our instructional technology coaches. We know that with any change, whether it's in education or any part of life, there are sort of, we call them the early adapters, like those people who are just jumping in the water and they're all the way across the lake and they're on the island waving and saying, hey, I got this, and they're actually sharing some of those great ideas with us. And then we know that there are people who
change naturally can be a frightening thing, and it takes more time. And so we've also had really specific conversations with our coaches about being intentional, and there might be individuals or departments or buildings who are not as ready to reach out and say, hey, come help me, I need help. And so being intentional in terms of looking at, are there buildings, are there departments, are there teams who have not reached out to our technology coaches, and being intentional and deliberate from the coach's perspective and going to those teams, inviting themselves to department meetings, offering professional development for those particular groups, so that it's not just about the teachers reaching out to the coach, but the coach looking at, are there pockets that we know we need to continue to develop in the district, and being intentional about going to those groups. Again, with 2 individuals, with teachers among 10 buildings, that certainly is a challenge, but something we continue to try to lessen the number of teachers who aren't being impacted by the coaches.
Mr. Flanders?
Well, I'll start by saying I'm definitely in support of this because I've seen too many examples in the business world where you spend several $1 million on technology and nothing on the people to make it work, and the technology fails. I would really prefer to not see all this money we've invested be used as fancy doorstops. That being said, I think that your estimate for the cost of this position is low. This does not sound unlike some of the other positions that you've presented in previous weeks as somebody that you can hire with out of school or with a few years' experience. This is a seasoned individual who has that ability to coach and mentor, and so it's going to be somebody with that 7 to 10 years and special abilities. So I think that 90,000 may be a low estimate of the impact of hiring in this position. So maybe that should be adjusted to reflect that.
Yeah, great point.
Any other comments? I'd also like to put in my 2 cents that I think this is,
I have one comment.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Berg.
I guess a question I have, is this position a teacher/IT person, or just IT or teacher, vice versa?
Teacher.
Boy, teacher.
Teacher.
Teacher more than IT.
Without a doubt.
Okay. Thank you.
So I'd like to echo Mr. Flanders' comments about putting the investment into the human capital to make our investment in the infrastructure and hardware pay off for the district. I also appreciate the administration's over past superintendent and continuing on's incremental approach of trying something and we need more, and coming back to us. I agree this is an area we need to invest in, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other comments?
Okay, moving on to balanced literacy. These are, when we talk about balanced literacy resources, ultimately we're talking about instructional materials, books, resources that would be used primarily by students, and certainly then there are teacher resources as well. When we talk about balanced literacy, and we're going to start here, and I promise I'll give just a short overview. Balanced literacy is really an instructional framework for teaching reading and writing. It is the framework in East Penn that guides our reading and writing instruction in the district. And when you look at all the components of balanced literacy, if we start at the left end and work our way to the right, we can think of it as a scaffolding or a continuum of instruction. And so at the very left side where we talk about interactive read aloud, that's very explicit direct instruction in which the teacher is using an appropriate grade level resource or book to read aloud to a group of students and model reading strategies that we know good readers use. We then move to shared reading, and again, there is certainly teacher direct instruction, but we're relinquishing some of that responsibility, and we have students who are following along in a resource and sharing in part of that reading process. And then when we get to guided reading and independent reading, again, the teacher is still certainly involved. There is instruction happening without a doubt. But in guided reading, students are working in small groups, and they are grouped based on their instructional reading level, and they are all typically reading from the same resource or book that is written on their instructional level. And then finally, we get to independent reading, which is self-explanatory in terms of students are reading independently on a resource that is on their independent reading level, meaning we know it is a level that a student can read successfully on his or her own without much or any support at all from a teacher. So when we talk about resources, I did provide for the board, because I can appreciate, we in education, I've said this before, we love our terms and we love our frameworks, and they certainly are very important in terms of giving us common language and understanding about solid reading instruction, but I wanted you to be able to have some concrete materials. So you'll see examples of the resources that we're proposing for a specific grade level, and in particular in the upper right-hand side, you'll see that it talks about shared reading. So this would be a book for first grade in which the teacher has the book and the students have the same book, and they could be following along and at various parts sharing in the reading process. And again, as the teacher, I'm also modeling strategies as well. And then you'll see there are resources that are for guided, they say guided reading on them. And so these would be books, for example, in first grade, in which students who are all reading on the same level, and the reading level is identified on the back of the book for me as the teacher, so that I'm sure that if you're in my guided reading group, we are all reading the same book that has been identified as your instructional reading level and is then appropriately challenging. So that's really to give you something concrete to anchor you to what each of these different terms means. So when we look at our current resources in reading and writing in East Penn, here's what we currently have. In kindergarten, we have Fontes and Pinnell is the publisher. And in 2018-19, so for this school year, we purchased resources for our full-day kindergartners, specifically independent reading resources, guided reading resources, phonics resources, because phonics instruction is a critical part of reading instruction as well. We also have, in kindergarten, units of study in writing, and we've been implementing units of study in writing since 2016. So that is writing resources to support our writing curriculum. The other piece that I'll mention that we have in kindergarten is the developmental reading assessment. It's referred to as the DRA. That particular assessment was purchased in 2012. And so when I talked before about like the teacher providing direct instruction, and I talked about things such as instructional level and independent level, it is critical that we administer an assessment to students so that we know what those reading levels are. We don't just guess. You seem to be working on grade level, you seem to be working below grade level. We administer a research-based reading assessment that actually diagnoses and identifies an independent reading level and an instructional reading level. And we as teachers use that information to then inform our instruction. So I emphasize that because the assessment is really a critical piece of this whole instruction process. So that's what we currently have in kindergarten, and the process that we use to identify and select those resources really is a similar process that we've always used in East Penn. It is a committee of teachers and administrators of the particular grade level, sometimes a grade level above as well, join that committee so that we can talk about, A, what are our needs, what's our mission and vision, what's the curriculum, what resources best align to to our curriculum and to our needs. In first through fifth grade, you'll see the resources that we're currently using. The publisher is Storytown. It was originally purchased in 2008, and it's primarily a shared reading resource. And what I mean by that is, I might date myself here, but it's like the reading textbook or an anthology. It's a single reading book that has a variety of stories of different genre in that book. The stories are typically supposed to be on grade level. But as you know, we have many students in our classrooms who are reading potentially well above grade level, some on grade level, and some well above grade level. So those resources are supposed to be about grade level. Recognizing that a single textbook for students of varying abilities was really not going to meet our needs, over the years we have purchased independent readers as well as guided reading resources from various publishers. So that's what we currently have in 1st through 5th grade. And then we also have the DRA that we're using in 1st and 2nd grade only. Typically, that's the point at which we would stop then getting an instructional reading level on students, because we would then look at potentially some other leveling systems for students who are proficient readers in 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade. And then also in 1st through 5th grade, we have units of study in writing. That's the current state of affairs. When we look at what we're proposing to purchase for 2019-20, particularly in kindergarten, we are proposing that we would purchase interactive read aloud, which are, in essence, resources that the teacher would use with a whole group and or small groups to model reading behaviors and reading strategies. So the other piece that I'll mention here is you probably already have identified what's in red is what we're proposing to purchase. In doing that, meaning in purchasing the interactive read aloud for kindergarten, that would really complete our balanced literacy resources for kindergarten. We did not purchase those last year. We realize now that is a need, and we are proposing that for kindergarten. We are also proposing for kindergarten as well as 1st grade, you'll see, a change in our assessment tool that we use to identify those reading levels for students that I've talked about in terms of being very important. Instead of the DRA, we are proposing the benchmark assessment system. One of the primary reasons, there are several reasons, but one of the primary reasons is in the DRA, it provides teachers with information regarding students' fluency, meaning how fast they read and how accurate they read. And then it also asks students to do a retelling, which is sort of a recount of things that they recall from the story. The DRA does not give us a really good handle on students' comprehension, how well they understand text that they've read, which, as you all know, is a critical part of the reading process. The benchmark assessment system certainly we see as a tool that would provide us with far superior information regarding not only students' accuracy and rate at which they read, but more importantly, their comprehension. And then will provide us with instructional levels and independent levels that align perfectly with our Fontes and Pinnell resources. When we look at our 1st grade proposals for what we would purchase, again, full resources to support our balanced literacy continuum in 1st grade, meaning independent reading, guided reading, interactive read aloud, and shared reading, as well as phonics. You might recall back from our original budget proposal, this was different from what we were requesting at that time. At the time, we were proposing potentially purchasing certain components of Fontes and Pinnell for the entire elementary level, or I should say up to 3rd grade, because as of now, Fontes and Pinnell resources are available through 3rd grade, and we know that resources are being developed and are close to being released, I believe, for 4th and 5th grade. But having said that, we were looking at purchase certain components for all grade levels. When we think about the level of change that our elementary teachers are facing in terms of addition of writing resources within the past 3 years, addition of science resources within the past, I think, 3 years as well, the addition of new math resources in the past year, we really felt the need to be systematic and thoughtful about how we're implementing and phasing in resources. Hence, we are recommending all of Fontes and Pinnell resources for 1st grade only for next year. The total cost of the red that you see on the screen is about $180,000. In response to a question that you might be thinking in terms of, okay, what about the other grade levels? As we think about the future, we do anticipate that in future years, we would be coming back to the board to request purchases of Fontes and Pinnell resources for second and third grades, because we know that is a need that we have right now. Again, we also know that we need to be systematic and strategic and take our time with phasing in resources. So we are not recommending second and third grade just yet, but I wanted to share with the board there is a vision and there is a plan for ongoing implementation of resources. As of now, the approximate cost for those additional resources is again the same, about $180,000. If we then think about the impact of adding these additional resources, it certainly would provide us with consistent research-based resources for our students, including an assessment system, instructional resources or materials, books for whole group instruction, as well as a variety of level resources for small group instruction. You see the cost there to finish kindergarten as well as to do first grade. And then you have again as well the projected cost for future years as well. Questions about resources?
Ms. Bowman?
Could you tell me the implications of, if we stay with the current assessment, we don't get as good a handle on reading comprehension, then what happens? Is the implication that something's missed in a child's development, or they're paired with the wrong reading resources, or what happens when we don't get as clear a handle on their comprehension?
I almost feel as if I should let Dr. Gutman answer that question. She's giggling already. Would you like to take that one? Sure. Okay, come on. Sure. You recall Dr. Gutman from our last meeting. She works very closely with our academic support assistants. And I think anyone who works with her would say she's really sort of our resident expert in reading and the science of teaching reading. No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. Okay, to answer your question, what happens with using the FAS, as we like to fondly call it, is that it is more text gradient. So when you're looking at the DRA right now, it gives you levels within kindergarten level, first grade, second grade. What the BAS does is it provides even more levels within that grade level band. So if I'm a kindergarten teacher, right now with the DRA, I can get maybe 4 to 5 different levels, but with the BAS, it could be anywhere up to 10. So that when I go to pick my guided reading resources to have that instruction during my guided reading, I'm going to have much more pinpointed texts, as well as doing the part of the comprehension, which is called like the comprehension conversation that the DRA doesn't have. It's just that simple retell. I can see specifically what reading behaviors I need to work on with that child to increase their comprehension.
Okay.
Does that help?
I'm going to repeat back to you what I think, if
Sure.
that's okay.
Sure.
It allows you to better pair them with the correct reading materials.
Yes.
And then also change how you teach them based on their specific needs.
Yes, so the teacher is going to be able to diagnose more specific reading behaviors to work on with that child. And alongside of the benchmark assessment system are actually prompting guides that come with it that then the teacher says, based off of this assessment, I'm going to use these specific prompts with these students that they then internalize and use to better themselves in their reading.
Okay. And I was kind of blown away by the cost of this. Is that for the assessment? Is it for actual little booklets? Like, what is that? How does that break down?
So there is a cost per each of the contexts. So partly the shared, the interactive read aloud, the guided reading, which has, I think, over 250 titles. So we're talking about major major groups of books coming in, because again, if you're, I'm going to say a first grade teacher, you may have students who are coming to you not reading, and you need resources for simple picture books with some basic words on it, to a child who may be reading on a second grade level, so then you need to have books on that level. So the guided reading materials tend to be the larger costs because you have so many different levels within that guided reading. So that's where we see the crux of the cost.
Yeah, and actually, like, a fantastic question, because in terms of first grade alone, Tricia's right, when we talk about guided reading, which are these small books, 150 titles per classroom.
Oh, per class.
And then, again, the independent reading, which was the other book that we talked about, another 100 titles. So there's a lot of resources. It's not just a class set of 30 books.
Okay. And as a classroom teacher, you really struggle to try to find those materials for those different levels in your class. And so when we can have them right there for our students, we're going to move them along, and we're going to push that needle quicker and sooner for all of the kids.
Just one final question. I'm just wondering if we've looked into something, some of these online digital libraries that are free to schools now, like Epic, where the books will actually read themselves to the kids, or they can read and stop and click on a word and it'll tell them what the word is and define it for them. And those are free, whereas this obviously has a big price tag. And it's my understanding that those books are also, you can search them based on grade level, probably not to the level that you're talking about here. But I don't know, I'm just curious if that's something that could work for us.
So the conversation is, we certainly have Epic, and we are using it across the district, as well as Reading A to Z, which is also another electronic form. The main difference with these resources is that it also embeds all of the strategic strategies, behaviors, notes for teachers. So when they pull out that guided reading book, there is a menu that's with it, with the specific before, during, and after reading strategies that have been research-based in guided reading. So when you simply just pull off an article from Epic, the teaching isn't there. You can do many different things with it, but once you give the BAS, you have those assessments in front of you, those behaviors. Then you go to the menu, which aligns with that level. Okay. So let's say the child's a level B, then I pull up a B book, and there's a menu of what I can be doing with those students right there.
Okay. Okay, great.
So it all is a coherent system, and that's what we're trying to build. And our teachers, with having Storytown, are finding that they're pulling from so many different ways that we're losing that coherence, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And this allows that coherence behind all the contexts.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Smith?
I had a quick question specifically related to guided reading and the resources. And may want to come on back.
Just stay there.
So I think this is fantastic, and I love the way that you just spoke about the menu of options. My question is, what happens now to the guided reading resources that are already being used in the classroom? Can teachers use those books with the Fountas and Pinnell system? It's already there, even though it doesn't have the menu pieces that you just spoke to. If they don't fit in, are we taking those guided reading resources and using them as independent reading books now? And if that's the case, do we feel that the 150 books that each classroom is receiving is enough to be a rich enough experience when we have some of these texts already in place?
All of those things. Can I hire you? Because that's exactly what we want to do, right? One of the things is that we do have guided reading materials in all of our buildings, but we have varying levels of it. So if, let's say, one of the buildings was a Title I school and they had some extra funding at the end of the year, we may purchase guided reading materials, but then another building didn't necessarily have that. So we're trying to level, first of all, with these resources. Second of all, the 150 titles will certainly help our teachers, and the menus will be very helpful in being strategic about our guided guided reading, but we will continue to use the other guided reading materials. I worked closely with some of our IST teachers to level them to the Fontes and Pinnell levels so that they match. And so we're looking at doing that to our current libraries. And those that we find to be old, that may not have the rigor that we're looking for, we're looking to put into independent libraries.
And then one more quick question. I briefly looked at some of the titles that were there in the sample. I think those are great for our primary kids, but when we start to get them to third grade and the intermediate, you're starting to get into chapter books for the first time, maybe even late second grade for some of our kids. Do you feel that the samples that fit into those ability levels and grade levels are robust enough and challenging enough, or are they all very thin like what we just saw there?
So Fontes and Pinnell levels things from A to Z, and when you get into the older levels, you will see that the texts become more complex and the topics are both fiction and nonfiction. And so yes, we do believe that over time that you will see novels in like a grade 3. Again, we were just showing you first grade for today.
Thank you.
Dr. Levinson?
Can you give me specific examples on what the data say, excuse me, on the improved outcomes when using these?
On the benchmark assessment system?
Yeah, I mean, in implementing the Fontes and Pinnell books and looking at, student outcomes or performance, I guess is a way you could say that, on students that had this versus other programs, in terms of being able to?
I don't believe I have that for you at this time. The literacy continuum was developed by Fontes and Pinnell, and Fontes and Pinnell have been the leading researchers in balanced literacy since 1970 something. So they do have a lot of research behind all that they are doing. When we rolled out full day kindergarten and we started to align resources based off of our vision and looking at that wheel, if you can see the wheel that we had, we really felt that we needed to bring in more rigor to match our PA core standards. And when we went looking at other things and went to other school districts, we felt that the Fontes and Pinnell matched our mission and our vision and the framework very well. And the literacy continuum is kind of like the backbone to that. So it really promotes responsive teaching. So it doesn't matter to me if you come to me and you know how to read already, or if you don't know a letter. These resources are going to cover and help a teacher to give the students what they need.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Champagne?
Thank you very much. This is very helpful. Just out of curiosity, what happens to the existing kids that are in the existing program? As obviously the kids in kindergarten if we go forward with this, we'll get the benefit of the additional materials and the additional, structure around those materials. So that now the kids that are moving on to second, third grade, what impact will this have on them? Are we going to continue with what we have? What is kind of your thoughts around that? Just, are they suddenly missing out on something, or are we going to have to go back and kind of pull them back into some of the stuff that, they are missing?
So we have had the balanced literacy framework for a long time. 2010, thank you. And so what our teams of teachers have done under the guidance of Michelle James was, when we saw that we had Storytown, but it was not enough for us, and we didn't necessarily have funds for an ELA curriculum, we worked as a committee to map out each of those contexts and look to see where Storytown fit in, as well as then, and this is what the teachers are doing, they are now looking at other resources such as EPIC, such as Reading A to Z, and they are pulling things to meet each of those contexts and each of the standards, but they do not necessarily have these resources as of yet.
So they will continue with the current system until we decide whether we want to go forward with, if we prove this and then, implement it beyond this level. But so you'll continue to use the DRA tools, not all those things you have, is the way you're planning on going.
Correct.
Kids that are still not in first.
Have already started.
Yeah, already started, yeah.
Correct.
Mr. Flanders?
To rephrase the questions that Mr. Champagne asked just slightly. So you're saying there's no significant disadvantage to the ongoing second and third graders. It's just, obviously you wouldn't be proposing this if you didn't think it was better, but it's something that you say gives you it's just better tools to accomplish the same stuff, and there's no significant difference, or is there something that would be missed by those kids?
Of course, I would prefer to have this move forward into more grades, because I do believe having that backbone of the literacy continuum would be helpful for all of our teachers, and having these resources at their fingertips would just make them more responsive teachers of reading. With that being said, with a limited budget, we do have the balanced literacy framework in place, and teachers are using their resources that they have as best as they can.
Ms. Bowman?
Just a follow-up. I am curious, it all sounds like such I guess a clinical way of teaching reading, and I worry about like losing the love of reading. Thinking of so many kids who were really turned on to reading by completely unclinical books like The Diary of a Wimpy Kid. And how do you balance that with this program where it's a book that a kid's not going to run home and say, hey mom, I read this today, or it's not that kind of material?
One thing I will tell you is that we brought into the district level literacy intervention, which was actually the precursor to a lot of these resources. Fontes and Pinnell came up with that intervention for the most struggling students, and that was something that we purchased with Title I funds. The stories in all of the books are phenomenal. The kids love them. They love the characters. They love learning about everything. The nonfiction texts are very compelling. Okay. So Fontes and Pinnell have done a wonderful job with that in regards to building fantastic libraries. They do have a component called the Book Club that has more of the authentic text that you are talking about. That is not in our overall presentation to you today, because we do believe we have those books already in our independent libraries. Our teachers are reading those to kids during Read Aloud. Certainly, I know my own daughter's at West Coastville, and her librarian's helping her pick out those books. So we will be ensured to not lose that.
I think as well, and I appreciate the observation, and I agree with you. I think what we did as well tonight is we really sort of focused on the science of teaching reading, and there really is research and what we know about best practice and the way to teach reading. So we've sort of like opened the curtain on the science piece, but without a doubt then there is the craft and the resources that we're recommending as well. The craft or the art of teaching. And the resources that we're recommending are certainly high interest, topics of interest to young people, and know that the dynamic process of teaching reading that happens in our elementary classrooms every day really is not as prescriptive or scientific as sterile as maybe we just sort of
that's sort of me.
it. Sorry. No. Yeah, but I appreciate the observation.
You answered my question. Thank you.
And certainly the interactive read aloud and the shared reading really does promote that joy of reading. More of the science is during the guided reading.
Great.
Round two. Mr. Champagne?
Just, we talked about earlier, the need for an ESL teacher. So is this system better for the kids that are coming in at a reading disadvantage, like through the ESL type of curriculum? Is this, how does it match up?
It's really good for every subgroup that there is, but I will tell you that within each of the contexts, there will be strategies and ideas to help meet the English learner with the material. So it's very nice for a teacher to be able to look at it and say, okay, I'm teaching this specific phonics skills, but this child doesn't speak necessarily our sounds, and it gives you ideas of what you can do to help that child.
Okay, thank you.
I just had a real quick follow-up, and actually wanted to echo Mr. Ballard's comments from 2 weeks ago. I wanted to remind everybody this was actually a budget presentation, and we didn't see a line item of $180,000. We heard a rich discussion of the impact of that $180,000 and what that's going to look like for our kids in the classroom as part of a budget presentation. And so I just wanted to thank you and the whole administration for taking the time and the effort to put this together to kind of paint a picture for everyone here to understand just what the impact of those dollars looks like in the lives of kids on a daily basis in the classroom. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Ms. Campbell.
All right.
With the district update.
Yes. Really just some very important celebrations that we want to have of our students. Congratulations goes out to over 30 of our Emmaus High School student artists who were recently awarded various distinctions through the East Central Pennsylvania Scholarship Art Competition. And all work that has been awarded a certain designation is now up for judging in New York in a national scholastic competition. So if you have the opportunity from February 24th through March 15th, the student artwork is on exhibit at the Marlin and Regina Miller Gallery at Kutztown University. So that might be a great thing to check out over the next several weeks. The other group of students who I wanted to recognize are several East Penn students who attend LCTI, and every month the career and technical education instructors at LCTI recognize 2 students for their outstanding effort, improvement, achievement, or leadership in their respective programs. And Emmaus High School's LCTI January Students of the Month are Ainsley Waldrop in Culinary Arts, Brendan Aldinger in Precision Machine Tool Technology, Bradley Gardner in Welding Technology, and Christopher Rohrbach in Diesel Medium and Heavy Truck Technology. So congratulations to our EHS students. As you heard our student reps highlight earlier today, the Emmaus High School Pediatric Cancer Club is hosting the 2019 St. Baldrick's Shave for the Brave event on March 8th at 5 p.m. at Emmaus High School. If you've never had the opportunity to participate or observe one of those events, it's really pretty remarkable. One of those events that's facilitated and run by our students that really sort of leaves you breathless. This event unites our community through students, faculty, members who bravely shave their hair to raise vital funds for cancer care. In 2017, our event earned almost $80,000 to go towards pediatric cancer research. So again, if you're able to join us on March 8th at 5 p.m. at Emmaus High School, come out and show your support and celebrate life. And also congratulations to Catherine Olson from Lower Macungie Middle School. She recently was recognized as the 2019 Prudential Spirit of Community Award. Catherine was among the top 10% of all applicants in Pennsylvania this year, and her volunteer activity stood out as so impressive that she, based on her hours, has qualified for the President's Volunteer Service Award. The other piece, a reminder, and we shared this information as well on various communication mediums, our inclement weather makeup day notification. We have now used 6 snow days, and as listed on our calendar, there are 3 days that have been built into our calendar, so we need to make up 3 additional days. So a reminder, school is in session April 18th, June 12th, and June 13th. And for Emmaus High School students only, they will also report on June 14th and 17th. And again, graduation is remaining as originally scheduled on Sunday, June 9th. And a final piece of information to share with the community. Our board had their board docs training this evening, and our plan is that for the first meeting in March, which is on March 11th, our board will be functioning in a hybrid model, which means that we're going to still produce paper agendas for that meeting, and then we will also be trying out board docs, which is the online management system. And then our goal would be that for our March 25th meeting, so our second meeting in March, all of our board materials will now be accessed online using board docs. And there is a link to board docs right under the board section, the board tab of our district website. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Campbell? Okay, moving on, I'll entertain a motion for personnel, items A through K.
So moved. Second.
Is there any discussion? Ms. Allen, will you call the roll?
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Flanders?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
Ayes.
Motion passes. Business operations, may I have a motion for items A and B?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Ms. Allen, will you call the roll?
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Flanders?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. Moving on to curriculum, may I have a motion for the educational conferences?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Ms. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Flanders?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. Next on the agenda is policy. I didn't see a lot of input from the board. I don't know if we want to just go through by exception, see if anyone has additional comments on any of the, in effect, the changes that we discussed last time were incorporated. Do we want to go through item by item or just by exception on? Okay. Dr. Munson, do you have some comments?
I had one, it was something that didn't get changed. I think this is on policy 200.
247 or 248?
I'm sorry, 249.
Oh, 249.
249.
This is the last.
Podium.
Okay, which page?
Very first page.
Okay.
So there was a discussion of, there is what strikes me as a weird overlap between our definition of bullying, which includes electronic acts, and then we separately specify that bullying includes cyberbullying, which seems to already be included in bullying, plus the word cyberbullying is not defined. My proposal would be to simply strike that whole line, because otherwise it raises questions of what's the relationship between cyberbullying and intentional electronic acts directed at another student and so forth.
Okay. Other comments?
No, that's my comment.
Okay, were there any other, Mr. Champagne?
Yeah, on, I guess it's 103, under the section guidelines, step 1, reporting.
What page?
No, there's no page numbers
Oh, there
on the
aren't.
bottom of these. So it's under guidelines, step 1, reporting. First sentence ends with, encouraged me to report the incident to the building principal. I think the words "or designee" should be added there.
You have to be consistent. Mr. Flanders?
Also in Policy 103, under Delegation of Responsibility, which I believe is the third page, the page right before the guidelines, down number 3 at the bottom of the page, I believe I had mentioned last time that this one says it seeks to obtain consent from the parents and guardians for the victim or the complainant. And I was wondering if that should also apply to anyone else that is involved, if they are also under the age of 18. I didn't know if that was taken under consideration and not put in for a reason, or if that just was something that got missed.
Do you have any comment on-
We did take a look at it. I'm just trying to recall my reasoning, because I think it came from me. Well, it did.
Will you remind him?
So all suggestions, we did listen to all suggestions. Mr. Fisher and I met for a long period of time, and we did reach out to PSBA. And so the recommendations that were not made, specifically there was legal rationale or rationale based on definitions or something otherwise in a different part of the policy that addressed all of these different things. So Mr. Fisher felt like throughout the policy that it was acceptable.
I didn't find a legal requirement to have to do that. I think that was the rationale as I recall now, rereading it a second time.
Okay. And then my other question also on Policy 103, but it may appear in others, is has the word immediately, it's bold and in italics, was that added or was that already?
Added.
And do we define immediately? Because immediately sounds like if you don't do it within the next 5 minutes, you're in trouble. So I'm wondering if that would open us up to some sort of problems if somebody didn't do it right away.
I think go ahead. I was going to say, I think where I remember seeing that, it was under a heading of within 10 days, these steps must happen.
Okay.
And in the case I remember seeing it, it's when the building principal is not the person that should be handling it. He has to immediately,
We wanted to bring that, to make a clear distinction. It's not to be within 10 days. If the building principal is the subject, you don't wait 10 days as the building principal.
Okay.
Yeah, did we quantify it? No. I mean, it's a matter of changing as soon as, it's either immediately or as soon as you recognize.
As soon as it's practicable?
As practical.
Or same business day or something like that, just to say, did we meet that guideline or not? Not, maybe same business day would be more clear.
Or as soon as practical, I think is.
One of those.
Yeah.
That's right.
I just don't want to open us up in case something happens and we didn't do it immediately.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Thank you. We'll have our third reading and approval at the next meeting. Okay. Moving on to other educational entities. First up is approval of the contract, general operating budget for Carbon Lehigh Intermediate Unit. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
And Ms. Bowman, would you like to say some words about that?
So they kept the contributions from the district's study. Ours actually went down a little bit, but that's more a factor of the number of students we have in the IU, I believe. I'm new at this. The increase in their budget was mostly salary increases, and they kept everything's really right here. They kept benefits the same, didn't increase anything there, which I'm not exactly sure how they accomplished that, but they did. So that's really all there is to that one.
Is there any discussion or comments or questions on the board? Ms. Allen, will you call the roll?
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Baumann?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Flanders?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. Next up is the operating debt service and capital budget for Lehigh Carbon Community College. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
We have our representative here, Ms. Thompson. Would you like to say some words on that?
Actually, basically, we've done what we've done the past couple years, and that is the school district's contribution has remained the same. And as was pointed out, there is a variance based on how many students are involved. But basically, it's the same. However, I would like to say a few other things after you vote on that.
Go ahead.
I can just go ahead. You talked about students having outstanding performances in various things. We have a student from East Penn at Lehigh Carbon Community College. Her name is Catherine Seibert. She's a second-year student, and she is a semifinalist in an undergraduate transfer scholarship, which is a national thing. There are only 8 students from Pennsylvania who made the cutoff, and she's one of the 8. So that's really neat. I gave each of you this piece of paper, which basically points out that the community college is a very positive influence economically in the community. I thought you would like to see that. And at L-Tri-C, we have a program, the College Scholars Program. It's in Parkland, it's in Whitehall, it's in Palmerton, it's in a number of school districts, but it's not in East Penn yet. And basically, the idea is that students could attend their local high school and also the community college at the same time as juniors and seniors. And when they graduate from their local high school, they also get their associate degree from L-Tri-C. And as you may know, our credits transfer in obviously specific programs to places like Penn and Princeton. So an associate degree from L-Tri-C is not something that you wouldn't value. At the present time, our new schedule that we just approved, for a full semester, for a full-time student, it's $2,130. So if you have a junior from here who does 2 semesters as a junior and 2 semesters as a senior and gets their associate degree, and then transfers to one of the state universities or Muhlenberg or Albright or Temple or wherever, where we have articulation agreements, they have 2 years of college for a very cheap amount of money. So I'm here suggesting whoever needs to deal with looking into having East Penn part of this program, if you would do so, it certainly would be to the financial advantage of a number of our students who would qualify to be able to be a community college student and a high school student at the same time. And there's another program that I'm not aware that East Penn participates in. Now, I know we have great facilities at East Penn, but L-Tri-C has something that's called Science in Motion. Have any of you heard of Science in Motion? Basically, it's a vehicle, and it's a lab, and school districts make arrangements that the people that run the Science in Motion program come in and do specific labs in your school district. And why this is particularly interesting to me, when they were presenting this, they indicated that the man who did this was Mark Case. And I don't know if you, my daughter had Mr. Case and Mr. Nato, and instead of being a literary person, she took chemistry, physics, and biology as her major in college because of Mr. Case and Mr. Nato. So the Science in Motion program, if you wanted to look into that, there might be something really good that we could benefit from that. So, as always, exciting things are happening at the community college. One of the exciting things, they're moving the nursing program down to the Donnelly Center in Center City, Allentown, where we have so many students who take public transportation or walk there, that we're expanding our offerings.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Ms. Thompson before she goes back to her seat? Mr. Ballard?
This program you referred to, isn't that called dual enrollment?
No, this is not dual enrollment. Actually, I should compliment the people here in East Penn that the number of students that we have in dual enrollment has increased dramatically in East Penn. For a while, we didn't have a whole lot of students in dual enrollment, but this is, you actually get your associate degree. Where dual enrollment, you can just take a course.
Specific courses.
Dual enrollment is a great program. That's another thing that we offer.
Great. Any other questions for Ms. Thompson? Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments and questions on this motion? Ms. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Flanders?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Baumann?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. And finally, may I have a motion on the Lehigh Career and Technical Institute General Operating Fund and Academic Center budgets?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Champagne, do you want to say something about that?
Yes, I think the administration at LCTI has done a very good job this year in balancing the needs of the students as well as the ongoing increases in certain costs. The budget has gone up about 1.2 million overall. Most of that is in salaries and benefits. The good thing is they're able to offset much of that with increases in funding from the state and at the federal level. The impact to East Penn of this new budget is an increase of about $17,000 over our current expenditures this year. Our current expenditures are around 2.3 million, so we're going up a little over $17,000 at the general operating level. And I also want to say that, this includes initiatives like the welding lab and other, things that they're doing to increase the number of programs at LCTI. They're also, working hard to improve the quality of the academic center. As you well know, Dr. Mark Cavell, who was here as an assistant principal, is now the principal of the academic center. This will be his first year of a full budget, and that budget has gone up about $50,000 overall, they've done a very good job of working to improve the quality of the offerings for students who want to take advantage of the academic center. So overall, I think the administration up there has done an excellent job in pulling together a very sound budget. Thank you.
Thanks. Are there any questions for Mr. Champagne? Ms. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Baumann?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Flanders?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. Next, we have a legislative report. Mr. Ballard?
Thank you. Right now, we have no information on the education budget. That's primarily because they have not held the hearings on the Department of Education and other presenters on the education budget. We expect that within the next few days as they'll hold hearings. The tenor of those hearings will probably tell us a lot about the way things are going for the education budget. The governor has been pushing for more money, as usual, and there have been some comments by some Republicans that they were in favor of certain increases, but let me tell you that it may not be in the areas associated with us that some of those increases occur. Not that it's bad, but it just may not be for us, because the current key interest in the new legislative session appears to be in workforce development. Governor Wolf signed an executive order to create the Keystone Economic Development and Workforce Command Center. The center will expand the collaboration between government and the private sector to recommend ways to better coordinate workforce and economic development programs across state agencies and identify barriers that may prevent someone from working or preventing businesses from hiring skilled workers. Also, it will monitor implementation of the various workforce and education proposals outlined in the governor's statewide workforce, education, and accountability program, which is a proposal in his budget. This week, on March 11th, the House Education Committee is studying a bipartisan package of 8 bills addressing career and technical education issues, which feeds into this workforce development idea. And these bills have various results that they are trying to get. There's one that would expand the online databases of articulation agreements. Another one would deal with career information and recruitment, would deal with the Commission for Agricultural Education Excellence. Another one would create a CTE investment incentive program, including tax credits for businesses to support CTE programs, much like the EITC program now supports scholarships, quote unquote, for charter schools and private schools. There's another one that would create an online career resource center. Another one would require the Pennsylvania Department of Education to create an inventory of workforce development programs offered at secondary and post-secondary institutions. And another one would require CTE programs to establish occupational advisory committees, another piece of overhead for CTE. And another one that would add at least one administrator from a career and technical center to each workforce development board, which is apparently done by county. So we're talking about a whole lot of looking or trying to look like they're looking at career and technical education and workforce development. So that's where I expect there will be a focus on getting more funds into those areas, which of course means that there may not be as much funds for other areas like us. So hang loose. That's primarily what it is right now. We're just listening. Again, listen carefully to the reports about the hearings on the Department of Education testimony in front of the House and Senate committees, and we'll get some kind of feeling for how people are feeling about the governor's proposals at that time. But that's all I can give you right now.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Ballard? Moving on, there was no executive session before this meeting. Our next regular board meeting is Monday, March 11th, which, as Ms. Campbell said, will be a hybrid, paperless paper meeting. So we'll see how that goes.
Point of order?
Yes.
Do we want to repeat in this section the fact that we had a training session before the meeting?
We had a training session, but it was not an executive session. We did have a training session for board docs. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Board's adjourned. Meeting's adjourned.
Both.